Right, afternoon everyone. My name's Hannah Wilson. I might know some of, I can't see all your faces, but I might know some of you from social media. I'm the co-founder of Women Ed and the founder of Diverse Ed, and I've recently joined Whole Education as one of their associate directors. And one of the things I offered to bring was my diversity and inclusion perspective and experience. And basically for next year, for the Whole Education members, and I know not all of you are Whole Education members, but we are a membership network basically, and we have a primary offer, a secondary offer and a trust offer. One of the offers next year is going to be a fortnightly webinar with an external speaker and a fortnightly open forum where we can discuss the D&I strategy in our schools. So what I wanted to do this side of the summer was to do a couple of pilot webinars with people who I think are really sort of like thought leaders in this area. And I'm delighted this afternoon that we've got Sophia and Lorraine. Lorraine is the Director of Education and Sophia is the Director of the Teaching School at Chiltern Learning Trust. And if I was going to tell you there's one trust in the country who I think are doing D&I right, it's Chiltern. They've been doing brilliant work for a long time. I'm delighted to be collaborating with them. And they have been doing a lot of outward-facing activity via social media during lockdown with free CPD. So I will make sure I send some links out to you afterwards. So this afternoon, it's going to be two parts, basically. Part one is going to be, we're going to play a video that they've put together as a presentation about how they as a trust and how they as a teaching school are driving their D&I strategy forward, with a particular focus on ethnicity first, and with a particular focus on curriculum development as their kind of their starting point. So that's going to be a video we're going to play. Whilst the video is playing, please feel free to use the chat function and pop down reflections or pop down questions, because we're then going to open it out to a reflection and a discussion where you've basically got Lorraine and Sophia's attention for a good sort of like 30 to 40 minutes to ask them questions. They are a bit further forward than a lot of other trusts and schools and teaching schools, and they'll be able to talk you through the journey they took, the decisions they made, the impact that they've had, perhaps some of the barriers and obstacles they've had to navigate along the way, because this isn't always sort of like clear sailing. And I will chip in as and when I need to as well. So please do use the chat function. You don't have to put your video on. If you want to put your video on for the discussion, you're very welcome to. We are recording the session because there's quite a few colleagues who can't join us this afternoon. So we are recording it and we will be sharing it afterwards. Also, it's a lot of information to process, so it means you can go back and press play and listen to it again at a later stage. So without further ado, we're going to play the video. So you've got a series of slides and a voiceover. So please use the chat function and then we'll go to the discussion at the end of the video. So thank you in advance for your attention.
An inclusive curriculum. Thank you to everyone that's tuned in today and everyone that will be listening to this on YouTube later on. Why are we doing today's session? And it's really important that we kind of get to that part before we get onto the session, because actually the feedback after our Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, a whole school responsibility session was that a lot of people said, I'm incredibly inspired by what you've told us today. The thoughts of the panelists, listening to Gwyneth, listening to Sheila, listening to the guys from Black Curriculum, Lavinia, Penny, Hannah Tyman, all of these brilliant people were on that session, incredibly inspiring. And I want to make change, but I don't know what to do. Where do I start? And that was actually quite unique in the fact that we've never really had that from a session. And people take the inspiration and people trial things, people do different things. But actually what we realize is that this whole aspect of education around anti-racism and around BLM is that actually there's not a huge amount out there. People have the goodwill, but don't actually know where to go. In the last few weeks, we've seen brilliant resources come out from various bodies within the educational sector. But what we know people want to do is from CEOs to head teachers to heads of department to teachers. That's the kind of people that we've had contacting us about saying, right, what we really need you to do is look at the next step. What do we do after this session? We're inspired and we want to change. We want to make a change to our curriculum. What are the next steps? And for us, actually, I thought the best way to look at this was to look at our own trust. Chiltern Teaching School Alliance is a part of Chiltern Learning Trust. And for us to really take this forward, it's important that we actually start from within our trust. The session today was supposed to be on a topic called system leadership, but actually, because this is such a pressing issue and because it is so important to so many of our followers and so many of those that tune into our CPD, we felt that this was the right time to change this session to something that will be a lot more meaningful and will be the next step after our BLM session. There will be more to come. I know that there's people planning roundtables for head teachers and leaders, black educators, and I know that will contribute a massive part to the work that we do. I also know that I've got the brilliant opportunity of working with my fantastic SLEs within my team to develop and actually bring together the wealth of resources that are out there and actually put them in one place so that we can share them with you. And that's something that we plan on doing. We will be able to share some resources with you at the end of this session. I'm delighted that our trust took on the challenge to say that actually we're going to look at this, not just bottom up. We're not going to look at the teachers that are inspired by this, but actually this is a leadership issue, starting right from our CEO and our Director of Education, Lorraine Hughes, who you will hear from today. Lorraine will talk through what we are planning on doing within our trust, to look at our curriculum, to see actually is our curriculum fit for purpose. What changes can we make? And it's really important that one of the things that we had to do for this process was to really seek out advice from experts. Going out to black educators, going out to black leaders, going out to organizations that have been in this area of work for quite a long time, to make sure that actually we too, like many of you, were thinking, right, we definitely need to do something, but we're not quite sure. So for us, actually, the conversations in the past 2 weeks with the number of educators that we have spoken to and had Zoom calls with have really helped shape us in our thinking around the curriculum. What I hope you take away from today's session is Lorraine looking at this as a Director of Education, working with our CEO and working with all of our heads and our curriculum leads in our trust to see what we plan on doing to make changes. Changes that are meaningful but not tokenistic. Changes that will add value and richness in knowledge to the curriculum and not just be another bolt-on, because that's not what we want this to be. We don't want this to be one of those things that every teacher dreads about when they're thinking of how do I add that into my lesson. We want this to be something that people naturally feel empowered about including. People feel that actually the curriculum will be much richer as a result of this. The inclusive nature of our curriculum and how we engage with our young people and how we prepare young people for modern life in Great Britain, this will add value. This will make our curriculum a lot more meaningful. So today's session is about our thinking process. And what I hope you take away from it is looking at the steps that we've been through in the last few weeks, looking at what we plan on doing over the next few months as we go into the new year, and hopefully take some inspiration. What I do want from you all is to engage with us on Twitter today at Chiltern TSA. Tell us what can we do differently. Tell us about some good ideas that you're trialing in your schools. Share them with us. Take some of our resources. They're not resources we've developed. We take no credit for that necessarily. We've taken resources from around the educational landscape, from people that have been posting things online, and we've put them together. Take them, use them. We want people to use these resources, but at the same time, contribute resources. Help us develop a resource path that we can really add value to. That educator that's alone in a school that wants to make a difference but actually has no access to quality resources. But more than that, actually what I really want is people to give short videos of how they've used that resource. One of the things that came across quite well in the sentiments that people raised after the session was, I feel like I want to make a difference. I feel like I know what I can do in my lesson, but what I don't have is necessarily the confidence. And I would love to hear how other people are using these resources, what changes they've made. So today's session is the starting point of our journey in making sure that we work towards a more inclusive curriculum. We're looking at one element of the protected characteristics today. In the future, we hope to expand that to other elements of protected characteristics and ensure that there's a full inclusivity within the curriculum that we prepare and develop for our young people in our schools. Contact us, share your thoughts with us via Twitter, and check out this video on our YouTube page later and share this with colleagues that haven't had the opportunity to tune in. Thank you very much. Enjoy the session.
My name is Lorraine Hughes and I'm the Director of Education for Chiltern Learning Trust, and today I'll be talking to you about our approach and what we plan to do to actually deliver a curriculum for diversity. Our approach is not yet finalised, but this is just some ideas about what our thinking is at this stage that we would like to share with you to give you some understanding, and we would like feedback, we would like dialogue, so please join in the discussion. We are going to talk today about how we're going to spend a lot of time in what we are calling a learning process. So we're not diving into audit tools, checklists. We're not really looking at the resource hubs at the moment. We want to spend a significant amount of time thinking about how we're going to go through this process to make sure that what we do is not tokenistic and that it truly is embedded. So our particular curriculum audit will look at ethnicity as one of the protected characteristics. I'm not saying that there is a hierarchy of protected characteristics, but we're looking at what our context is for our trust. We're looking at our demographics, our statistics, information that we've gathered so that our curriculum review looks at ethnicity. And I'll talk more at the end of the presentation about how we will use almost a quality first teaching approach to then think about how we then move on to other protected characteristics. So I think what I'm saying to you is know your context, know what your priorities are in terms of your inclusion agenda. So how about a little starter task before we kick off with the rest of the presentation today? What I want you to do is think about 3 powerful positive BAME role models that you learnt about in school. So I'm not asking you to share that, we're not going to have a discussion about that, but just think about that for a minute. Could I now ask you to remove any sports people, any musicians and any Americans? And can you also think about any BAME teachers that you might have had in your education, maybe not necessarily at school? So why is this so important? Why do we need to review a curriculum and think about curriculum for diversity? Well, if we do this, it will really improve the sense of identity that our young people have and a sense of belonging. There's no doubt that it will improve social cohesion if it's done well, and ultimately improve the educational experience for all. And when I talk about identity, I know I'm talking today about a curriculum for diversity that focuses on ethnicity in terms of protected characteristics, but actually a whole discussion about identity is important for all children. If we were to take, I don't know, white working class girls, for example, and talk to them about identity, by exploring that issue and then thinking about that, it will engage them so much more in education. So that is a particular area of a piece of work you can do that can impact on all children. So this is important for every child. Although I talked to you at the beginning about our context, we have a diverse range of schools in our trust. And this is as equally important to every one of our schools, despite the demographic or the context that they're in. So the starting point has to be that we recognise that there are inequalities. The starting point has to be a desire to shape a better and more representative curriculum. And I think it's really important to say at this stage that we want to create a culture where it is okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say we're not there yet with this, or we don't understand that, or we want to learn more about that. We have to spend time having open discussions and spending time in this learning phase and recognising our own biases as well. So I think it's really important that we start with being transparent about the process and that we effectively communicate with all of our stakeholders about how we're going to go about this and what our key aims are. I think it's important to build a diverse team, and by that I don't mean let's engage the Black and Asian leaders to do this piece of work. I mean let's create a diverse team across all of our schools, upskill them, get them into a position where they've really learned a lot about an anti-racist education and about ethos of schools that are inclusive and how to go about this curriculum change and this curriculum audit. I think it's important that we consider right from an early stage about who our stakeholders are going to be, who are we going to listen to. For me, that's about listening to pupils, but also parents as well as staff. And then how are we going to respond to that and what we're going to do with that information. I don't know the answer to that yet, but in the planning stage, we need to think about that. I think it's then important to think about how we share what we've learned and what our next steps will be. And I'll talk about that in a bit because I do have a few ideas around that. So as I said, it's really important to take time in this learning stage. So why else is that? Well, there will be barriers. It'd be silly to think that there aren't going to be barriers that we need to overcome. It might be the case that not all of our leaders or staff buy into this particular programme. It might be that they lack the confidence or they don't see the link between their subject and education around diversity. They might not understand that by doing this, we actually affect improved social cohesion and standards of education for everybody. It might be that they don't understand where they might obtain good resources to use in the classroom. So we're going to spend a lot of time in this learning phase so that we engage with narratives that are not just our own. That will include reading and a really comprehensive professional development programme, just like I said, around an anti-racist education, around ethos of schools, inclusion, recognising our own biases, and everyone needs that training. So what does the next phase of the review look like? Now, while I say it's a new phase, actually in my mind it's still very much part of that learning phase. So what I think we do next is we continue with the idea of openness, transparency and dialogue, and continue to be vulnerable but be okay with that, but just start asking questions and being open to have these discussions. So as part of that, I think the next kind of part of the learning phase is that we have these discussions with our subject leads and our staff, and we talk to them about their curriculum, both the content and the delivery. So what is part of that content and how are you teaching that? Do you explore different role models, authors? Who are the characters? What are the texts? What are the perspectives? What about the companies in business studies, for example, that you use as case studies? Are there stereotypes within the curriculum? And if there are they deconstructed or are they left unchallenged? Are there generalisations? For example, in the arts, do we explore varied arts and music culture? In geography, do we challenge stereotypes around perceptions of Africa and think about the kingdoms rather than perhaps war and famine? Do we think about the development levels in geography and the fact that the historical links and colonialism have very much got everything to do with where the development levels are today? I mean, they're just a few questions. I am also a geographer, so I can talk more about the geography curriculum than perhaps I can other curriculum areas. Do we then think about representations and contributions from our BAME communities? And I think that our community is a massively rich resource that we can use to actually enrich our curriculum. And I think we do this with every subject area. But when I talk about curriculum, I don't just mean the timetabled subjects. We all know that curriculum is everything. It's the enrichment, it's the classrooms and the corridors, it's tutor times, it's assemblies. So we need to explore every aspect of our curriculum in this fashion. We must ask the same in terms of the trips and the visits that children go on and the speakers that come into our schools. And like I just said, it's not just about the what, but it's about the way in which we're teaching this. So we should ask pupils about how they feel about the curriculum in terms of both how they receive it, but importantly how they engage in it, and how they feel about their sense of identity and belonging and how that links to the curriculum. I think it's important that this is still part of the learning and that we think about what is the ethical intent. So that is part of the professional development programme, but part of the discussions that we would then have with our staff. And I think it's important to evaluate how we teach about not only identity, but this whole concept of British values. I don't necessarily agree with the term British values, but you could almost use that as a method of deconstruction and comparison. So what are British values? How do they compare to other values? Is it not something like universal values? But we should look at social disadvantage and social justice and systemic racism as part of that review. So what do we do next? Well, it's really important that we come back together and that we share and that we reflect. I would like to create, through our own teaching school, are almost like a group of experts who can deliver and have delivered brilliant examples of curriculum for diversity. So we might have a range of subject specialists and other that can deliver sessions like this that you can tap into that might show a brilliant example of how to teach X or Y in a geography or a maths or an English classroom. But alongside that, not only will they be exploring the content, but they'll be exploring the how it can be delivered, alongside perhaps a bank of resources that you can use, so that budgets then don't become another barrier in the way of all of this. There are already lots and lots of resources out there. The Runnymede Trust, the Historical Association, Lavinia in our last session on Black Lives Matters, she talked about resources that they'll be releasing, and on the website under her Black curriculum materials there's some fantastic lessons there already. I think at the end of June the TESS also launched a hub for resources. But it's important that it isn't just the resource. We need to have professional development about how to deliver these different topics as well. I'm in a really privileged position in my role because I oversee not only the teaching school but the initial teacher training. So we have a fantastic opportunity to deliver the professional development not only to our current staff but the initial teacher trainees that are coming through into education, because this is quite frankly quite absent in ITE. We can then bring our SLEs to schools and to support not only our trust schools but other schools, and we can actually then engage other schools. So for example, if you've got anyone in your schools that are experts, get them involved in this. We're certainly going to be doing that across Luton and Leighton and Dunstable, and engaging with other schools where they can show exemplary practice. We want to create those links with the community. I talked earlier about the community being a rich resource for education. We want to do that, particularly with our parent and carer body, and get them engaged as well. So these are the next stages in terms of my thinking at the moment for our particular curriculum review. So as I said at the start of the presentation, this mustn't be an add-on, it mustn't be a fashion, it mustn't be tokenistic. It absolutely has to be about coherent mapping and planning for progression, and it has to have equal importance to other dominant knowledge so that it's absolutely legitimate knowledge. And I don't just mean about the timetable curriculum, I mean in terms of the whole curriculum. So it must be mapped. We thought about using learning journeys. So around our schools, much like probably the whole of the country at the moment, you see in the displays that you have these lovely learning journeys that explain what children learn from, I don't know, year 6 through to year 9 or whatever. We thought we could use those to actually show our community and our stakeholders where we teach about diversity, and so the children can understand that mapping. That's just one idea. I think in terms of that professional development theme that I've been talking about throughout, that has to continue to be important, because this has to be reinforced with all of the day-to-day routines in schools that combat racism and ensure that there is religious tolerance and so on. So that's absolutely critical that anti-racist education carries on. I think the other thing is to think about accountability. So in our trust, what we do is we think about what is our vision and what are our values, and then that translates into our KPIs, and then our KPIs translate into what we hold staff to account on. And we have something called a governing body template, which is filled in by all of our trust schools, and that then aligns to our KPIs and our vision and values. So this must absolutely become part of that process. We need to hold ourselves to account. So for fear of repeating myself, could I just conclude with a few key points? Like I said right at the start, this doesn't cover all protected characteristics, and I'm not creating a hierarchy of protected characteristics. Like I said, what I think we're doing here is creating a kind of quality first teaching approach by exploring ethnicity in our curriculum. And then once we've got that model right, just like when we make teachers fantastic teachers, they can teach anything, we can then think about, next year, we can think about perhaps groups or ways in which we explore the other protected characteristics. Maybe we call it diversity first teaching or something, but Hannah Wilson might have me for that because that was her idea, not mine. It's important that we look at the language we use. I think we can also tap into some of the work that we've done as a trust around storytelling. There's lots to be used there in terms of development of literacy, but also to develop narratives that are not our own. I think that's a brilliant way of exploring this as well. And to think about the whole school. I know I keep saying that, but it's really important that our classrooms are safe, inclusive spaces, but as is the whole environment. And going back to the original point about the aims of this, if we create children and young people as agents of change, then we change schools, and ultimately we change society that has a lasting change.
Thank you so much, Lorraine and Sufyan. So they do that as a video because they're being asked to do so many presentations. It just got a little bit more cleverer with their time. I've got a couple of questions that were pre-submitted by people who booked. So I'm going to go to those questions first, and then please do feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question to ask, or pop the question into the chat function if you'd like me to ask it. So Sufyan, can I please ask you the first question? We had a question that was pre-submitted inquiring about how should schools approach and implement the Black Lives Matter awareness with students in particular. Could you just sort of like pull out a couple of things that you guys are doing around the student-facing activity, please?
Is he there?
Sufyan, are you there?
I can start if you can't hear.
You go for it, Lorraine. He was there.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be entwined with this particular piece of work that we're doing. But I mean, some teachers are so inspired and so motivated that some of our schools have been delivering some quite inspirational assemblies already, remote ones, given the fact that the children are learning from home at the moment, because a number of the staff have shared them with me. I mean, already in our schools, we are in a privileged position that some of our schools are quite great at this already. I mean, I watched probably the best assembly I've ever seen this year. That was a remembrance assembly, and the boys were powerful because they were reading poetry, but they were recognising the contributions of various nations and contributions to that war effort, or war efforts at large, and so on. So we are very much involved in addressing this with children, but we want it to come through this deep piece of work, rather, you know, not that I'm taking away from any of those great teachers that have delivered these great pieces, but we want it to be properly embedded and mapped, like I tried to present in that particular presentation, and then bring lots of coherent materials together where people can ask any question they like and be vulnerable and be honest about those questions, so that when we take that back to children in the classroom, we can engage in some really good discussions with them. But the priority is absolutely to develop that curriculum so that our young people can engage with a representative curriculum.
And just as a follow-up question from me, because I'm hearing this a lot through my networks, why teachers feeling uncomfortable because they don't know enough, or they're not confident enough to do the Black Lives Matter activity, or BAME teachers being asked to lead it because they are people of colour? Like, how are you navigating the diversity of your workforce in who is doing this work, and how are you upskilling everyone?
Well, it absolutely shouldn't be Black and Asian teachers, as I've said. You know, it's a bit like schools where you have Black History Month and you ask the Black teacher to lead on Black History Month. You know, that's not what it should be about. And I think one important point is we all have biases. If you've all grown up in a British education, we're all going to have biases, some more than others, yes, and we need to be honest about that. So I think the way we're going to tackle that big piece of professional development is key. Now, I haven't organised that. Sufyan and myself have put away the summer holidays for us to really think about who will lead on that, what will it look like. We've even considered whether psychologists should be present or not in that particular piece of work, because it's quite a challenging thing to say. Because we teach this, we may be racist. That might actually cause people an emotional impact, and I understand that. So we want to think really carefully about who contributes to that. We have done some training in our trust on unconscious bias, but we want to come back to that and do better with that. So that will be part of the education. I think listening to pupils' perspectives is really important. But again, there's a whole issue around that, because it's not always what the children say, it's what they don't say. And to elicit and understand their views is another complex piece of work. But we want to spend a lot of time developing a professional development for leaders down to classroom teachers, to show them the why it's important, and then to reassure them about how we're going to go about it, so that we can build that confidence and they feel part of that process.
Thank you. And one of the other questions that came to us before the session was around the idea of advocacy and allyship, and how those, like, I'm very conscious I'm a straight white woman, and I don't want to talk on behalf of anybody. How do we do the walking alongside each other as opposed to talking on behalf of people?
Yeah, I understand. I completely, empathise with that view. I mean, as a trust, as a teaching school, when I first came to the teaching school a number of years ago, I applied for one of the equality and diversity bids. Again, it was contextual, so we were looking at our particular context. At that point, our schools were predominantly in Luton, so we applied under the characteristic of ethnicity, and we were really successful. And I felt very much the same, Hannah. I didn't want to be perceived as some saviour, because I'm not. It's nothing about that at all. It's about justice, really, and equality for me, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. So what I did at that very early stage is I happened to meet Sufyan at a community event. I said I'd put the bid in, and I'd really like to hear his views on the ideas that I had around what a programme might look like. So I think it's the same principle. It's just being very honest about what your ideas are, and then just like we've done with this presentation that we've put together here, you know, we've spoke to quite a lot of people after our Black Lives Matters session went out about, well, how would you shape an effective curriculum review? We think this, what do you think? I mean, we came to you, Hannah, and shared some ideas. So it's about just talking to a range of people and just being transparent and saying, look, do you think this will work? We've got some excellent leaders and practitioners in our trust. This morning I was online with Dr. Patrice Evans and just talking to her about, what do you think? And she'll be joining our question and answer session after our own trust similar delivery as this. So be transparent, ask questions, just gain as many views as you can. I think people are keen to contribute and to understand, you know, how they can make things better.
And thank you for referencing your diversity and equality grant, because one of the other questions was around how we can progress, or how we can accelerate the progress of BAME teachers into leadership, because we know we're underrepresented at every level in the school system. Can you just share with the people who might not know some of the work you've done as a Teaching Scholar Trust with BAME leadership in particular, please?
Yeah, sure. So that particular programme that we started a number of years ago started quite small with about 22 leaders. And we put together a programme where it was very school centred. Excuse me 1 second.
The beauty of working from home, that's fine.
17-year-old son wanting me to take him to work. Very sorry. He's now shouting at me, no, not take, pick me up. Okay, right, I'll carry on. We started small with about 22 leaders, and we made sure that they had a very school-based experience. We wanted it to be practical and not something they might have been able to get at the time from, say, MPQ or something like that. We wanted them to go into schools and actually see really great Black and Asian role models, fantastic practitioners who were leading, deputy heads and so on. Unfortunately, there weren't any heads in our local area, but we did tap into our London networks. Lynette Kamala contributed to our programme back then. And we gave them mock interviews. They had to fill out application forms. They had to shadow in schools, and then all the normal kind of programme that went with it, how to apply, how to get in the room, etc., etc. But alongside that, what was important was that we were doing the unconscious bias training in our trust as well. Now, I know we weren't reaching out to the whole locality at that point, but you know, it's all well and good to have some fantastic programme, but if you're not addressing the very issue of the other barriers, what's the point? And I feel a little bit like that with the curriculum review. It has to be one whole cohesive approach, because you know, this is a really important piece of work. Yes, I'm going to crack on with it, but unless other areas are looked at as well in terms of equality and diversity, it's not that it's meaningless, but it won't be as impactful. So we are looking at a trust as to how we look at a whole package. At the moment, we do recruit by using local radio and different methodologies to perhaps the normal methodologies, so that we can reach different audiences. We do train through our own teaching school a range of teachers from very diverse backgrounds in terms of all protected characteristics. And we have continued with that equality and diversity programme. I think this is where I wish Sufyan was here. I think it's in its fourth.
He's back. He's here now. Join the conversation, Sufyan. Take your mute off.
I've been watching all the answers. I saw Aidan crash the meeting as well.
Oh, really? I missed that. So we're in our fourth year of, no, it was Liam. Liam crashed the meeting. He wanted a lift from work. So we're in our fourth year of that programme now, and as you may or may not know, teaching schools are able to go out as hubs for their equality and diversity programmes. I stepped back from the teaching school and Sufyan has led that, and it's, you know, it's become a really brilliant program. Although our particular one might be in terms of ethnicity, other providers can apply to us for any protected characteristic and lead on a program, and then we quality assure that, and we're kind of advocates for it. Yeah, please dive in, Steph.
Yeah, I was going to come in on the earlier question, but I think I wasn't on the screen when I was putting my hand up. I'll start with that, the allyship and sponsorship part you mentioned, Hannah, and I think from personal experience, on the other side, you and Lorraine talked about coming from a white background and without kind of trying to patronize, how important is allyship and sponsorship? Actually, I remember speaking to colleagues recently, and I can't think of something more important. One thing I know, especially at leadership levels in schools, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Majority of the leadership posts normally have someone earmarked for them. Very, very few, if you're looking at a percentage of the whole market, very few roles go out to people. Sorry, you can hear me? Very few roles go out to people in an open market. And I think that's really important to understand and appreciate. And therefore you need people out there that are your advocates. For me, I applied for the role at Chiltern Learning Trust because I felt I had an ally in Lorraine, someone I had worked with before, someone who I felt championed BAME into leadership genuinely because she was running the program, and that's how we came across each other. And since then, I've never made a secret of the fact that I do want to be a head teacher. And that's not a secret to Lorraine. She's my manager, but I know that I see her as that sponsor, as that ally that will step up for me. We often laugh after meetings when we sometimes go in, and it almost needs Lorraine to kind of remind people that I have more to offer than just a contribution about community or what the ethnic minorities feel about things. Because I'm also a school leader, an educational leader like everyone else. So that allyship and sponsorship is incredibly important, and especially when it comes from the level that Lorraine sits at. And we can't underestimate that. She's second to our CEO, and therefore that's incredibly important when people even junior down, and we often say, Lorraine probably doesn't experience it or feel it as much because she's very open to talking to anyone and everyone, but a lot of teachers from BAME backgrounds go away feeling really, really proud and happy. Oh my God, Lorraine Hughes remembers my name. She knows what I do. She knows which school I work in. And that's so powerful in thinking about how people can progress, because actually if Lorraine knows them, the next time a role comes up, there's a chance that Lorraine might say, I have someone, I know someone that's really good, and they might be able to do that. The thing about our program, people have mixed views about should we have a special program or is that marginalizing us further? And my perception and belief is that we do need a program, because actually a lot of the best high quality programs that are out there are based on head teacher recommendations. So if all of your heads are male, pale and stale right at the top, and you've got all of these white heads, and one of the problems is that churn of diversity hasn't come in because the only people they're selecting for MPQH, MPQML, MPQSL are the white staff in the school. The chances are, as a BAME person, yes, I want to be on a normal course. I wish that I didn't have to do a BAME course, but actually the chances were I was a part of the network for Asians and Black professionals that when it existed. I got my Ofsted training through them, Black Leadership Initiative. I got lots of training and development through them. I wouldn't have got that otherwise. That was because I didn't have to follow the set paths of somebody deciding whether I can do it. I went online and I bypassed it and I got myself professional development. So the BAME into Leadership program provides that. And the richness it provides in the fact that we try and avoid it being cliche, aspirational, motivational. Well, actually, no. What do you guys need? You need to improve your interview skills. You need to understand where you are. So a 360 review of where you are, your skills based. you need a coach, and coaching is incredibly powerful. You don't need a mentor, you need a coach. You need someone that can help you plan your career journey. And you need a network. That if the only thing that happens is that Adrian gets to meet 26 participants, Lorraine gets to meet them, and we introduce them to 6-7 other heads along the journey, that's powerful. That in itself has more power than anything we do.
So can I ask about the coaching? Because the fourth question that was submitted before the session was about that. What's the coaching entitlement for BAME teachers, leaders, or how have you benefited from coaching in your career progression?
I often think that in education, I'm a qualified coach, and I don't like the word coaching used in education, because 99% of the time people don't know what they're talking about when they talk about coaching. When somebody says, right, so our whole leadership team, we're going to start coaching. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you can coach. Just because you're a head teacher doesn't mean you can coach. Coaching is such a powerful tool, but such a powerful skill that can enable people to achieve so much. For us, we tried coaching across the program, where we used a variety of people. That didn't work, because actually we tried to use the goodwill of several people, and what we realized is some of them weren't coaches. So what we've now resorted to is employing one coach, a qualified coach that coaches across the program. It's not a person of BAME background, but I don't think that's necessary, because if the coaching skill is what we're looking for. And we're finding that the 2 hours that they have are incredibly powerful. So many people go on to privately book it afterwards, because they say, actually, I've got so much from these 2 hours that I definitely need to move forward and progress further. But almost every program we've ever done, the feedback about coaching is 1,000 times higher than any other thing that we will offer them. Everyone who gets good quality coaching loves it and feels like they've genuinely progressed as a result of it.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So that's the questions that were pre-submitted. Thank you, Chandrika, who's popped a question into the comments. So a question here, to go back to the curriculum, so it might be for Lorraine or for yourself, Sufyan. What is your thinking around cultural capital and its ethnocentric implications?
Yeah, good question. You know, we had a massive discussion. I was discussing that with the head at Chorney Girls. Only last week, we were sat in reception reflecting, and you know, it just depends who defines it, doesn't it? It depends what you're defining as cultural capital, because if you're defining that as not, you know, a particularly centric view, and you're defining it as a diverse view, then that's great. So cultural capital is perhaps an issue if you're defining that as dead white men, for example. So really, you know, I have quite an open view on that, because I'm open to thinking about what it means. But unfortunately, some people have viewed that to be a specific tranche of history and a specific view, given the new Ofsted framework.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And for everyone listening, if you don't follow my old deputy head, Benny Carver, please follow her. She does brilliant keynotes about diversifying the curriculum and decolonising the curriculum. And she did a keynote at the Team English conference on Saturday, which just completely, I'll send you all the link, it completely captures what Lorraine and Sufyan have talked about this afternoon. The second part of Chandrika's question was about diversity and inclusivity is first leadership representation and second curriculum. What are your thoughts about that? Let's ask both of you.
So did you want to just
Lorraine, what are your thoughts on that?
Did you want to finish off a little bit on the last question before I tend to ramble on? I'm really sorry.
I was just saying that it's the element of the whole cultural capital element. It is appreciating. I understand when people say that there's a cultural capital. We all have cultural capital. So I know I've got a huge amount of cultural capital based on my own background and my own experiences. And I'll have conversations with Lorraine that Lorraine will walk away having learned something about my culture and my background, and I'll learn off Lorraine. But one of the things is there is times, I know now that I've learned things, and I know that I'm always culturally slightly outside of what the norm is. So I don't know. I prefer cricket and not golf. People love to go to the theatre. I don't. Everyone was talking about Hamilton the other day. Oh my God, we're going to be watching Hamilton. I switched on for a second to see what it was, and I thought, nah, this ain't me. I can't. This ain't me. Yeah, this ain't me. I can't even pretend. And the thing is, I think it's important where our young people, especially in this country, one of my most emotional moments probably in the last couple of years was we had two of our schools together. One is Larkrise Primary Academy, and it's majority white, probably middle class because it takes the catchment is quite a small catchment and it's quite affluent in that area. And the other is one of the poorest wards in the United Kingdom, Dallow, where we have Dallow Primary. And we had them together for an event. And the kids in Dallow were incredibly bright, but it was emotional because I saw myself in the kids, because when I was watching the interactions and these kids were talking about horse riding, which now my child can do because I'm slightly more affluent than I was when I was growing up and so on. But they found it surreal. The kids from Dallow found it surreal that people actually go on horse riding. They found it surreal that people go out archery and people do this and people do that. And it was important because I actually thought that, you know what, actually I do want my daughter to be able to ride a horse because it's an experience I want her to have. I do want to take them to a theatre. I do want them to know what opera is. And there's certain elements of the British culture we know that if you are missing out on that element of culture, you're never going to fit in with that top level of leadership in Britain, because actually that's one of the things that they have in that culture. And therefore, by saying, I don't need that culture, I'm kind of marginalizing myself, because actually, if the one thing I have to offer is my skills, but if I can't fit in a team because I have no shared understanding of their culture, it doesn't matter how good I am on the basis of the fact that I'm not a great team asset, I wouldn't get in anyway. So I do think that cultural capital is incredibly important.
I just add something. Thank you so much, everyone. And Hannah, I've heard you talk a few times in my teaching career, and I love listening to your work.
Thank you.
So just on what you said, Sufyan, in terms of you wanting to teach your children some of these elements of essentially white middle class cultural capital, and capital because we can exchange it for your foot in the door, and you recognize that, and you're talking about people, your children wanting to feel included in these circles. I guess that's why I asked whether representation at leadership level needs to come before we talk about curriculum, because if we are trying to bridge gaps that we just don't have, you know, I come from a working class Asian background. If I'm trying to learn all the things that I didn't as a child and a teenager, I'm going to have to work at a different pace. And so perhaps here we're looking at, let's diversify leadership, so we're not having to do the same thing that we've been trying to do for decades now, which is getting our children to be that much more whiter, that much more middle class, not because there's anything wrong with that culture, but because we've had too much of it. And yeah,
I appreciate that, and that's really important that you say that. One of the things that, again, it's a discussion that probably doesn't happen outside of ethnic minority homes, but it's about what we value. So for me, me and my wife, we're both in education. For me, protecting our cultural heritage is really important. I'm very non-compromising on a lot of things. Religion is incredibly important part of my life. I hope that when people interact with me, they see that, and I don't like to compromise on elements of my religion where possible. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I think that the danger of that is, do I see representation happening soon? I don't. At leadership level, if I'm very honest, and it's not to say I'm incredibly optimistic, Chandrika. I'm one of those, like, I'm optimistic about everything, but we were so far behind that it will take 20 years to get to that level of representation, just because of the churn, just because of the way that things move, that we just don't have so many people in the pipeline have either been burnt and don't have the confidence to apply. We have more black ex-head consultants than we have black heads, because they've gone in, got a job, got sacked, and they're out. And people are lacking confidence. So it will take time. It's really important. I messaged yesterday on Twitter, part of SLT chat, you can't be what you can't see. It's great. We sit in schools, and I find it sometimes a bit insulting that we'll sit in schools and we'll say, sky's the limit, you can achieve anything because we're desperate for our outcomes. You, Imran, you will be able to run a bank in City, but Imran couldn't run your school because there's no one that looks like Imran in your school. Yeah, Imran would be lucky to run pastoral playground duties based on what you can see around in his school, let alone running Canary Wharf. And that's the reality, that if they can't see themselves in leadership positions, it's very hard to aspire. But at the same time, I'm really conscious that we don't beat the drum and end up in a situation. I want to be ahead. I make no secret of that. But I never want it to be as some sort of positive discrimination. And I would never want that association. I don't want to get it because one day people think, you know, the pressure's really hitting home that we all need a token Pakistani and a token black person in our organization. And it's really hard because I'm the only one in my central team, and we make no secret of that, as ethnic minority. And I'm always conscious of the fact that I want to work incredibly hard, because I never personally want anyone to think that I'm only here because of my background. And I know that's not why I was recruited. I know that, but it's something you live with. And I wouldn't want to live with that in achieving the ambition that I have my whole life, to start from where I started to get to where I want to get to, knowing that I didn't get there because of my hard work or anything else.
Sophie, if I can just pick that up as well, because during starting Women Ed 5 years ago and then BAME Ed started the year after, I think sometimes people compare the foci of women progression to the foci of BAME progression, and we've got different data sets. My understanding of it is women get capped at deputy headship level and they want help to get to headship level, whereas BAME get caught at the middle leadership level. And research shows that once BAME get to SLT, they're more likely to go on and be heads. So just for the room, some of the data, we've got 2 BAME CEOs in the whole country, 2, David and David. We have got 1% BAME head teachers in the whole country. 0.1% of our teaching staff in the country are Black African, but 24% of our children in our primary schools are BAME. So we've got a massive disproportionate gap between the children we're serving and the staffing in our schools. And I've got a meeting with Emma Hollis, the director of NASBIT, the Association for Initial Teacher Training, this week, because if we're going to get more diverse staff into leadership, we need to get more diverse staff into teaching. And actually, when we look at skits and we look at PGCEs, they're often run by middle-class white women. There's unconscious bias in the recruitment into the teaching sector. And we need to do a massive piece of work about careers education in schools, for everybody to see teaching as an aspirational career, because some cultures don't. They want their kids to be doctors, dentists, engineers. They don't see teaching as being an aspirational career pathway. And then when we do get our BAME teachers into the sector, they tend to leave by their 3rd to their 5th year. And BAME men in particular get pigeonholed, as Sufyan referenced, into pastoral roles. And not every black man wants to do behaviour. And when I ran big diversity and equality leadership programs, all I heard from all the BAME men was that they were sick of being pigeonholed and they were sick of being pushed down a particular pathway. Like, Sufyan, do you want to speak to that? Does that resonate with stuff that you've heard as well?
It does. I think the pipeline one even is quite difficult in one way, because actually I know loads of teachers that have trained and gone abroad. I've got family in Qatar, family in Saudi. My sisters and my brother-in-law out teaching in Saudi, and I can see why. I can see why, because actually, they're never conscious of being themselves there. They know that actually their identity as a Muslim. So if you're talking about the challenge of Islamophobia, they know that their identity as a Muslim is not a problem there. So people are coming in, training and leaving in 3 years' time because they look at the pipeline and they think, if I'm doing this as a way of social mobility, and I think that's really important. I'm a big believer in saying, I have come into education to make a difference to young people's lives, but I also want to earn good money. Because actually I come from I was pupil premium, I was free school meals, we were homeless. I come from a very poor background. So in my head, when someone says, you know what, money doesn't make you happy, there's probably a rich bloke that said that, because actually I want my mum and dad to be comfortable because I'm doing well for myself. I want my family to be comfortable. I don't want my kids to experience what I experienced. So I do want to get progress. I do want to make that. And sometimes the problem is people see the money abroad and think, actually, leadership in this country is not happening, so we're leaving. And actually the amount we're losing to Dubai, to Qatar and to Saudi is huge in the pipeline of especially ethnic minorities that are actually training and leaving. We're not able to retain them, and retention is a challenge. You talk about middle leadership. We have the same challenge, and it's really difficult in trying to educate people in that fact. If you have schools that are some of the best schools in the country churning out some of the best results, it's okay for the middle leader to be able to be a brilliant mathematician that brings you the best maths results, but that middle leader can't convert themselves into a deputy head from that. Why is that? What's gone wrong there? When we're looking at I was really pleased to go and see Star Academy. Star Academy is predominantly, obviously, started off as a Muslim faith-based academy, but actually these guys are producing some of the best results in the country. Majority of their heads in a lot of their traditional academies are still Muslim. So it's that whole idea that actually it is about breaking that stereotype. And the thing is, the only way that stereotype will break is when there is that impetus of, once you get a handful of heads from ethnic minority backgrounds in a certain area, culture in that area starts to shift. People find seeing someone like me a lot more comfortable. It's normal, it's not abnormal. When I go to some of our heads meeting now, I'm abnormal because I don't fit in, because of the way I look. When I go to heads conferences nationally, I'm abnormal. When I go to teaching school heads conferences, I'm abnormal. And the problem is, you've got to be able to be really thick-skinned, and people forget the emotional toll it has on you. Because actually walking into a room and being the odd one out it's the same as being a kid that walks into a classroom with a disability or something, when you know everyone's looking at you because of what's apparent. You now know everyone's passed a judgment because of what's apparent. I know that immediately people are thinking about me, and they're thinking of extremism of some sort. They're thinking about me and my being Islamist and my views on certain things. And it's really difficult, and that can't be broken until we have a wave in certain areas. And what you'll find is, the problem we're going to find in the United Kingdom is that the first wave of ethnic minority heads will all end up in one area. Because actually, I will think, you know what, Asma, I think we should pack our bags and go to Bradford because we've got a chance there. And there'll be other people that do the same. So there's schools in Luton that have got brilliant level of teacher intake from ethnic minorities and middle leaders, and then there's a school a mile away with none.
Just to pick that up, Sufyan, because Helen picked up the phrase, you can't be it if you can't see it. And I've heard that lots in the last 5 years, but then I've also heard the narrative around like being the first. And I know you in 5 Mats. I know like a system leader who is BAME, but the only person of colour in the whole system leadership in 5 Mats. And I know it's very lonely, it's very isolating, and it's also very wearing. And like, I'm friends with Ndidi, who used to be the only woman of colour at Teach First, and she felt like she was visible all the time, and she felt that pressure. But as a head who proactively recruited diversity, like I put in every advert, we are looking for diverse staff to serve a diverse community. I ended up with a disproportionate number of teachers and leaders who are from diverse backgrounds. And do you see that happening? Like what you said there about you get almost like groups of BAME heads in the same area. We get schools with very high BAME percentages. Is it because of safety, perhaps?
It is safety in numbers, because actually, if I go in somewhere, so for example, there'll be things, I know for me, prayer is a big deal. I don't want to work with an employer where I know that there's going to be difficulty around my prayers. I know that actually as a Muslim man, the one thing I have to look at is if there's no Muslim men in that area and there isn't a mosque nearby, if I'm in a school role, I cannot work in a school as the only Muslim man because I can't complete my Friday prayers. I need to do that. And that's an absolute fundamental requirement of my faith. So therefore, me going and working in a school as the only Muslim man is not doable. So we have lots of Muslim men apply to certain schools because they know, oh, great, the rest of them will be praying at Friday lunchtime and I'll join in with them. So there is that. But there's also the element of, and sometimes take the mick out of Lorraine for it, and you would have been the same. You sound like the Lorraine equivalent, that you suddenly have these white people that you think are really cool because they're okay with us. Yeah, and you suddenly think she's okay, and therefore actually when Lorraine goes to be a CEO somewhere, I reckon because of her personality, she will have more people gravitating towards her because they're going to feel safe around her judgment of them and understanding of it. And therefore, in one way, it's a huge advantage because actually certain communities we know have certain skill sets as well as discipline. We know that actually mathematicians in the Bangladeshi community and the Pakistani community are great, and getting scientists from their community are great. But I think that safety element is really important for a lot of people. For me, the safety element of leaving a job that I had for 13 years, I was insecure, and the safety element was going to Lorraine. And I always say this to Lorraine and Adrian, I didn't join Chiltern Learning Trust. I joined Adrian and Lorraine. And that's really, I don't know the values of the trust when I came, and I don't care because I trust in people. And I knew that actually if I leave where I was under Chris Nichols, who was a brilliant leader, I'm going to come to these guys. I need security because I need to know that I'm not going to be odd one out. I need to know that there'll be someone that cares. There'll be someone that will think when they do a staff do, they'll think about me and think, you know what, he won't drink. We shouldn't do it at the pub. Somebody will say, actually, we need to do a meal where we can get a halal meal. And I've got guys that do that. And I never walk away from my team feeling like I'm odd. It's a hassle, it's a headache. And you can't, unless you have that allyship and sponsorship, it's really difficult.
And I want to bring you in, Lorraine, because my next question, I want to ask you this question, Lorraine. So I've started a weekly webcast with D&I leads, and it's looking at the kind of the crossover between corporate and community. And we had our first one yesterday. And Rodora, who was in the Philippines, she used to be head of people at Unilever. She was talking a lot about this sense of belongingness. So a lot of corporates have heads of diversity and inclusion or heads of equality and diversity. But a lot of them are now calling them heads of belonging. And that really resonates with me as a school leader. Like, don't we all, as educators, want our children and our staff to feel seen, heard, visible, like they matter and like they're valued, because actually we all belong? And I feel like, is that how we should harness the narrative moving forward, that we are all committed to making sure that every single person belongs in our schools? Like, Lorraine, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I haven't obviously thought of it in that way because I didn't have those words to articulate it, but it was Sufyan was talking and I'm doing that with my lip because I'm feeling sorry for him and he needs a cuddle. You know, it goes back to that thing about no one's here to save anyone, but we're in a profession where we've all come into this because we care about people and we care about young people and we want the best for all of them, no matter what. So I think that actually, you know, I'm not being idealistic or utopian or stupid, but surely if we're in this profession already, we've got a better chance than other professions to capitalize on that. And if we educate just like I was saying in my presentation about that whole curriculum review, if we spend some time in that initial phase just educating and having some sense of understanding, and people engaging in unconscious bias training, which I think is pretty basic and normal, but people might not have done that. I think if people do that, we do have a chance, regardless of what community you're in, even if it is predominantly a white middle class community. There are people in this profession because they really care. But sense of belonging, yeah, that's huge. I mean, it's not a coincidence that I'm working for Chiltern Learning Trust. I went to Puttridge High School, that's one of our schools. I trained with Chiltern Training Group that I now, run with the head of the training. I lived in the Dallow area, that's one of our schools. I specifically saw this advert and chose to apply for it because of that sense of belonging. That's a community I really care about. And yes, we've branched out into Leighton and Dunstable schools, but it's an area that I am familiar with and is not too distant. We are a very geographical location. My cousin's child actually goes to school in one of our Leighton schools. So yeah, I think belonging is really important, and that you've hit the nail on the head in terms of that.
Soph, do you want to add anything, having reflected on that?
No, I think I like the word belonging, but I also, there's a danger. I always think, and I was saying this to someone today, I was talking to the Key, who are trying to put something together as a part of their offering on some sort of documentation to help people make a curriculum more inclusive. And one of the things that the danger is that you make diversity, you make belonging as the thing the person from the ethnic minority background does.
Yeah.
And so it's like, great, Soph, we'll have you on our team. You can be our diversity representative. And it's a bit like, I happen to be very deeply engrossed in our community, and that's kind of a coincidence, I would say, to somewhat, compared to majority of the ethnic minorities that work in our trust. They probably have nowhere near as much involvement in the community. But I'm conscious that I don't want to be I don't want to be a diversity representative of Chiltern Learning Trust, because I think Lorraine should be, or Adrian should be, because I think it should be above me in rank. I also think that for it to be more meaningful, and we're on a call here today and Lorraine's here with us, I think it's more meaningful, because actually to hear Lorraine say it, it's not going to be this little bolt on that this Asian guy that rocks up for 15 minutes once a year in our annual meetings or something and talks about how we do diversity. Actually, the person that's most important for curriculum in our trust is the person also looking at diversity. I think that's really important. So that belonging as a role is great, but I think the moment you create a role and it's not, belonging isn't the job objective of the people right at the top, there is a danger that we have loads of ethnic minorities that take D&I roles across a multitude of organizations, and that's the irony of it, that the only part that an ethnic minority makes on an SLT team is the D&I role, and not the head or not the CEO. So right now, if I wanted to go, I was looking at LinkedIn, there's plenty of opportunities in central London, because a lot of the big corporates want D&I people in the organizations, and there's lots of money to be made, really high paid jobs out there to be a D&I, but I find that tokenistic. I find that an myself in one way, because I want to be ahead. I'm passionate about D&I, but in my organization, I think that D&I it should be Adrian and Lorraine, because they can have the greatest impact. I have an impact in one area. They have an impact in the whole.
I apologize, I wasn't conflating the job title with what we do, but like I was running training for the last 2 weeks with 70 schools direct trainees in Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire, and they didn't know where to start with addressing the 9 protected characteristics as a beginner teacher. And I said to them, let's start with belonging. Every single one of you wants to teach a classroom where every child feels included and feels like they belong. And what I asked them to think about was, rather than just talking to the needs of the children in the room, so like as a school, we were the first mixed school in our area. In year 1, we had no trans children. but I knew that we would have a transgender child at some point. So we made sure that our school was trans friendly. So when that child arrived, we didn't need to then adjust what we said and what we did. So I said to the trainees, think about your classroom and whether you've got a kid in a wheelchair or not, whether you've got a kid who can't speak English or not, whether you've got a kid who is transitioning or not, what can you do to create a culture of belonging and inclusion? So when that child arrives, nothing needs to change. And I kind of feel like if we go through an approach of positive affirmation about kind of like getting the right conditions there, and Chandrika's referencing the Deans for Impact, where the best learning takes place when we feel like we belong, and feeling like we matter, feeling like we're valued, feeling like we belong, that emotional safety you referenced, Sufyan, we know that when we're emotionally safe and psychologically safe, that is when the growth and the learning actually happens. And I think one of my other big concerns about the sector, and if we bring together the kind of the talent management crisis with the diversity crisis, with the mental health and wellbeing crisis, we know we've got a lot of BAME staff, BAME families, BAME children in the country not feeling safe right now. And we need to reinforce that sense of safety in our schools and in our classrooms, so when children return in September, when staff return, we are demonstrating our commitment to making everyone feel safe again. Is that fair to say, Sufyan?
It is, and I think that is where belonging actually means a lot. Now, for example, for me, the thing that meant a lot, and I maybe it's the bloke side of me, but I find it sometimes really hard because Lorraine always messages me saying, "How are you?" And it's like, I was like, no one asks me how I am. This is really awkward. But I know that someone cares. But before I came back to work, now I kind of made it out to my wife that I had to be at work and have to be in my office because I just wanted to get away from the kids and the home. But both Lorraine and Adrian said to me, "How do you feel about coming back? Are you okay about coming back?" And that was that understanding of the fact that this community in Luton, but the BAME community, the evidence has shown that they've been hit really hard by COVID and Corona. And that there was nothing more powerful than them saying, "Look, if you're worried about anything, just give us a shout, we'll work around it." I, in fact, messaged Adrian saying, "Can you please send a message saying it's compulsory for me to come so I can show my wife." Because I need to be in. But it was that key, and I think like the same with the children. I think it's really important that we remember that I was looking at the number of deaths we've had in Luton, and it's surreal, but I've lost very close friends. I've lost friends, I've lost their parents, and it's been a really difficult time. And therefore that the approach just around how we approach the BAME communities after COVID-19 is really important, because we can get back in and pretend that in Leicester, in Birmingham, in Bradford, that these people haven't lost someone, when they have. Actually, this is the single biggest loss of life this country has ever seen since the war. And because of the way the narrative has been spun by media and the government, we're acting like life is normal when there's people that died. Someone died on my road yesterday. That is normal now because it's the new normal. But that has an impact because that will be a family. The grandchild goes to this school of the guy who died. So it's really important that some of the smallest gestures now moving forward will make the biggest impact.
Yeah, and that question, how are you, from a Black Lives Matters point of view and trauma point of view, but also from a mental health and wellbeing point of view, I've always been told to follow it up with, how are you really? Because a lot of people say, okay, and we have a default setting to brush things off, but actually we need to dive a little bit deeper. Another really good question I've heard is, what do you need? What do we need to do for you as an individual right now? I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 12, 13 minutes left, and we've had a very attentive audience, and I know I've listened a lot to learn and to reflect and to understand, but please don't be shy, and please don't miss out on the opportunity to ask Lorraine and Sufyan questions, and no question's a silly question. So is there anybody who's got a question they're mulling over, which you want to either type out or turn your mic off and throw out to the room, because we've got two brilliant human resources who we can take advantage of in the last sort of 10 10, 12 minutes. Has everyone gone shy on me?
Hi, I'm very
Hello.
sorry I was so late to the meeting.
It's been recorded, so you can watch the beginning.
Brilliant.
No stress, it's fine.
Oh, brilliant. I work in the opposite situation actually. I work in a very white working class school, and so we have quite a small minority of BAME students, and a small LGBTQ group of students, and I run both a group for both. So I run a Unite group and a Pride group, and what I feel like is happening is the pressure is almost on me and those students to make those changes. There's not really being embraced by as a whole school thing, and I was just wondering about advice in terms of getting the SLT on board really with what we're trying to do, because I feel it's not really fair for those students to be the ones responsible for making our school welcoming to them. It just seems a bit mad.
Sophia or Lorraine, do either of you two want to address that? But advocacy.
Lorraine?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say possibly, you know, has there been an opportunity for any of the leaders to come and talk to those groups to start with? That'd be a really good starting point. Yeah. And maybe you're the key there, because right at the start I can't remember what I've said and what I haven't, but it's not just asking the children their perspective, it's an adult being able to elicit that, because it's often what they don't say as well as what they do say. So you might need to be the person there that helps elicit, you know, some of that conversation. But I think, you know, my starting point would be to listen to the young people, because they'll ask the right questions. If they're supported by someone like you, they'll ask the leaders, what is their vision? It comes back to your vision and values, doesn't it? You know, what's the vision and values of the school? Okay, leaders, if your vision and values of the school, which are mostly the same, aren't they, across the country, about schools being inclusive places, the best chances for all, well-rounded people, you know, maybe it's for the children to ask the leaders, so how do you plan to do that? And you know, and how do you plan to represent groups like us? You know, I think that might be a way in. I don't want to go causing loads of disruption, but at the same time, I think, you know, I keep coming back to that point about, you know, which you sort of encapsulated in that sense of belonging, Hannah, but we're all teachers. We've all come into this profession. I might be a director of education now, but I'm a teacher first and foremost. And why did I do this job? I went to UCL and got a first class degree and got a master's from Cambridge. And I remember telling my dad that I want to teach. He was furious. Do what? Do you get a pension with that? Do you get a company car? And I'd come from a pretty working class background. It was about, you know, therefore my dad wanted me to have money, I think, and not the challenges that maybe he faced. But I came into this profession because I essentially care about young people and want them to have that chance. So whether I'm a classroom teacher or director of education, or hopefully a CEO in the future, it comes back to that. And I think, you know, any sessions where you can reflect on that, or will they engage with any bias training? Will they engage with any outside speakers coming in to get them to reflect and think about some of those issues, even if you don't want to go via the pupils? I think, you know.
I'll add to that about voice, because Dream, where's the staff voice in all of this? Like, are leaders and governors actually listening to the BAME staff? Because if they're not on the SLT, are decisions being made in SLT about BAME staff without listening to the views of BAME staff? Same with children, BAME or LGBTQI. And then we can't forget about our parents as well. So I've spoken to a lot of people like Sufyan, who are the BAME leader on a lot of maths, and they're all saying the same thing to me, like, schools are not listening to their communities in lots of the maths. They're making decisions that they think are best, but are we actually listening to the needs of the community and what they think is right? And Jazan Parfar, who some of you will know from Twitter, her daughter's in year 12 at a school in Milton Keynes, and she's mixed race, and her and her friends were disgusted at the messaging coming out from the school around Black Lives Matters and the stereotypical American civil rights type assemblies. So they booked an appointment with their head teacher, and he listened, and they've now got a student and staff advocacy group where it's a democratic group, and they're working together. And I think that's quite powerful, actually, about giving young people that voice and agency, but working alongside each other rather than sort of like talking up. And it's a really good question. Leapy, thank you for your question here about CPD, because I think if we're all going to think about practical takeaways, no matter what role we're in, what sort of CPD can we organise to upskill and educate staff to help them better address D&I in their professional lives. I'm thinking, Sophie, and from a teaching school point of view, what sort of CPT are you offering?
I think one of the things that kind of links back to what you just said. One of the most dangerous things, as I say, is a middle-aged white man deciding that he knows best for how to help ethnic minorities. Because almost 99% of the time, they're going to make things worse by coming out with something that is so politically correct that I'm not offended by it. I have no issue with it. And you've now made it even more awkward for me in so many different settings by you saying that this is what I expect and this is how we will make things better for BAME community. So heads definitely need to listen, definitely need to talk. The CPD part, I think, is really important. I'm not a big fan of, hi guys, here's your bit, like, do your safeguarding online, then do your health and safety, and then do your DNI online. Yeah, when you see a black person, don't pass a judgment. No, I shouldn't pass a judgment. And that kind of training, I find like stupid. You connected me with Antonia, and I said to Antonia that one of the training that I go and deliver is actually saying there's no political correctness in this room, and it's about frank and open discussions. And I've done this with schools where I've said, actually, I want everyone to say, what's the bizarrest thing? Because there's a school that was dealing with 100% Muslim kids. Right, what do you find really odd? What do you find that you wish you could ask someone that, you know what, I really don't get this? What is it that you've got a massive problem with about them and their community? And actually that no holds barred kind of discussion, and where they're throwing the questions at me, everyone walks away a lot happier, because actually it's not being, people don't want to be talked at. And this D&I is one of those things that when you start saying to someone, you need to have diversity and inclusion training, what you're trying to get at is their core, and their core will immediately shut down saying, because I'm not racist. So I don't need this. This must be for Tommy Robinson and his friends, but not for me. Where I think actually we are all, based on sociological structures in society, we all carry biases of some sort. And getting people in a room and actually talking about what the issues are. So having really difficult discussions about Islam, I'm open to the fact that we'll never walk away agreeing. You'll never turn around and say you'll find certain things acceptable, but at least we've had the discussion, because discussion and discourse is the thing that breaks all of the tension down. I find that that's the same with children, that actually if I was back in a classroom right now, I would have, and George Floyd didn't happen during lockdown, I would have had a field day with the kids. That actually, I want you to give opinions. I want someone to give me an opinion in favor, opinion against. I want to discuss this. Every time something terrorism related came up, grooming came up, I want discussion. I want views. I think that's the kind of atmosphere we need to create. The difficulty is you need really strong facilitators for that.
And culture. It comes back to the learning culture stuff, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about the classroom culture we create, where kids can ask those curious questions with no judgment. We're talking about staff culture, where we can have all the staff in a hall and tackle some of those really big, difficult questions. And I think I would broach your training in the way we broach our teaching. You'd quite often have a stimulus at the start of a lesson which kids reflect on. It gets them thinking, then it generates questions. So when I send you a follow-up email, I'm going to send you like 10 links to presentations, videos, audios that you could almost use as a stimulus at the start of a CPD session with staff to get the conversation flowing. Because if you just rock up and start talking to people about these issues, they almost need some warm-up time. And one organisation that I've done some training with, who I really, really recommend around D&I, Educate and Celebrate. So Dr. Ellie Barnes has got a PhD in LGBTQI culture building in schools. And we did it as part of our making our schools safe for our LGBTQI students. But the lens it gives you is that you look at how you talk in classrooms, how your policy is inclusive, how your uniform is inclusive, how your lunch times are inclusive. Are your toilets, are your changing rooms inclusive? So although it's looking at the lens of one of the 9 protected characteristics, it absolutely helped us audit and scope out all of our 9 protected characteristics. There's a couple £100, and you also get a box of diverse books to go in your library with LGBTQI role models. So I will send you the link for that. Go on, Soph, what do you want to add?
It was just, Lorraine knows this about me. I'm not shy to plug it. So if you want a really, really, really good trainer, the best trainer I've ever seen is myself. And I would not hesitate to book me if you want to look at a training session. And I even go with, you pay what you like, because I know it's
Sophia, I love your humility. No, at the end of the day, Julie, it's great, and I will send your contact details on. And I also just want to do a nod to the fact that the Chiltern Learning Trust SLE team are the most diverse team of SLEs in the country. You don't very often see the diversity that you guys have recruited in your SLEs as well. Well, that hour and a half went really, really, look at you, That hour and a half went really, really quickly. I want to say a massive thank you to Lorraine and Sufyan for gifting their time and experience and expertise this afternoon. I learn every time I meet you. So thank you very much for being such brilliant allies and advocates and thought leaders in this space. I will do a follow-up email to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. We will send you the link to the recording so you can share it as well. And I'm going to type up the questions and the answers for you, Leapy, for all of you. So the FAQs will be an ongoing document, the questions posed and the recommended answers or links for each of those questions. So thank you so much for all joining us this afternoon. Next week, next Monday, same time, we've got Alana Gay and Penny Abigail, who co-founded BAME Ed. Alana's ahead, and Penny works for Lufter, an amazing digital storytelling platform. So they are here next week to help develop the conversation. So thank you for joining us. I hope that was useful. And please do stay in touch about what you're going to do as a result of joining us this afternoon. So thank you very much. Thank you as well, Lorraine and Sufyan. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye. Thank you very much. Lovely feedback. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lorraine. I'll drop you guys an email and